Hi everyone, my name is Polina and welcome to Polina's Pages. Today I'm doing a special video. This is actually a request made by an account called Aesthetic Yoongi, a video on So Far From the Bamboo Grove by Yoko Kawashima Watkins. If anyone has any other requests, please drop them in the comments. I will gladly do them. And this is a video on my Read and Discuss playlist where I basically share author context, historical background, and also a summary and analysis. Usually these videos are around 15 minutes, but today is a longer video. This is basically a study guide that assumes you've already read the book, so without further ado, let's get started. Yoko Kawashima Watkins was born in 1933 in Nanam, a town around 50 miles away from the Manchurian border. Her father oversaw Japan's political interests, and people believe that her father was actually an army general in Unit 731 that was responsible for war crimes. After the events of this book, which we'll get to, Yoko went to Kyoto University for an English language program and then worked as a translator at a US Air Force base and met Donald Watkins, a pilot. They then moved to the US, to Massachusetts to be exact. It's really critical to stress that this book is semi-autobiographical and parts of it are fictionalized. With this quick look at the author, let's dive into the historical background. This book for me is definitively not like the Diary of Anne Frank, because although we can draw similar parallels in terms of both Anne and Yoko being a survivor, I think we shouldn't really hold a non-fiction book and a semi-fictionalized account that people think holds many inaccuracies in the same category, especially looking at the role that Yoko's father played. So one of the reasons that this book has elicited such angry responses is because of the way that Yoko portrays other countries. In this book, it is clearly shown that Yoko is the victim, and she is, because she is a young child essentially forced to survive in a terrible world, her entire country that she lives in, that she has known all her life, ravaged by war. No, she is of course a victim, but the way that Yoko writes about, for example, Korean soldiers assaulting women, it just doesn't sit right because of Japan's own history in completely ignoring and failing to take responsibility for its bloody actions and taking Korean women as comfort women. So of course this doesn't quite ring right with the people who still suffer the legacy of Japan's actions in the World War. I will try to outline everything clearly and summarize and analyze this work and minimize the effect that my biases have, but I will also talk about what I think throughout this video. Since it is longer, I don't really have time for a separate review section. I'm aware that not everyone knows the complex relationships between Japan and Korea, and so not know why this work is so politically loaded. Actually, Japan and Korea have a history of hostilities caused by Japan's imperial history because, like other countries in the region such as China, Japan wanted control of Korea for its key geographical position, amongst other reasons. Japan controlled Korea since 1910. It annexed the Korean peninsula after years of intimidation and war. Korea was only liberated in 1945, and then of course we had the whole split with Soviet forces taking control of the north and US forces taking control of the south. In 1948, Korea officially divided into two separate republics. Many Koreans did not want Japan to occupy their country, so in the days leading up to Japan losing the war, it was not easy for a Japanese girl living in Korea. Yoko is almost 12 and she lives with her mother and older siblings, her elder sister Ko and her elder brother Hideo, who both call her little one teasingly. Her father is alive, but he is very busy as a government official, so he is not at home. They live in a lovely home surrounded by bamboo groves, and actually this is one of the inaccuracies that people spoke out against because they said that, well, bamboo technically shouldn't grow in these regions, to which the author replied and stated that actually her father planted the bamboo. In her memories, it's more like grass. Her dad helps the family build an emergency shelter, and the family also knows to lie down and essentially cover their heads as soon as the planes come flying. So I will talk about some of the inaccuracies as I go along to kind of explain the controversy surrounding this book, and the planes is just one of them. So many critics have been critical of Yoko's constant descriptions of flying planes overhead. They say that the chance of her seeing a hostile plane would be like extremely low, since planes don't usually fly close to the ground, and if they were B-29s, they really weren't supposed to be in the region or to be flying low enough for her to see them. However, the author has addressed this by saying that, well, she doesn't really know planes and that she did see them, so maybe they weren't B-29s after all. And I personally think that this is the bit that you shouldn't really nitpick and you should focus on other parts. As a child, your memory is very susceptible, and of course this is a hugely traumatic event, so I think that most likely she probably just heard the noise of the plane planes, just like completed the image. Whether you think she did see planes or whether you think that she didn't, I think this is a very important point to mention in your personal response part if you're reading an essay about this in school. The author fictionalizes some parts and doesn't fictionalize others, so this is for sure something to comment on. So there's not that much to eat, and in school, because Yoko continues to go, the teacher comes in and tells the girls essentially that, well, certain parts of Japan have been bombed and most likely their relatives are dead. Actually, her parents tell her that the grandparents are alright, they're in a different part of Japan. One event that really stands out in the beginning is how there are a group of soldiers that barge into Yoko's house and they're searching for metals and other like belongings like bronze, silver, gold, etc. that they can use to make ammunition for the war. And so they take Yoko's Mount Fuji paperweight and they throw it in with her mother's glasses, and thus they smash the lenses. This makes Yoko furious and she pounces on the soldier and bites them in the hand, and then the soldiers kick her until she blacks out. This throws the reader straight into the violence that utterly permeates the book. However, it also shows the kindness that Yoko is shown because she's being treated by a doctor when she wakes up. And this really shows that kindness always seems to come to them and how lucky they are. And so this is the kind of dynamic that the book has. Mountain Fujiyama is a sacred symbol to many Japanese people. Yoko values this paperweight because it's a symbol of her homeland that she wishes to see, and the name Fujiyama, I believe, means everlasting life. It's a tall mountain that many people climb to visit the shrines and to experience the personal journey. So using this important symbol to crush her mother's vision makes Yoko furious. The glasses show her mother's ability to see. The glasses show her clear vision, her sense towards what's to come. The glasses are an important necessity. It's one of her key senses, vision. They leave her essentially helpless using her own country's symbols. The paperweight that for Yoko is her homeland is treated like it's nothing and used simply as an instrument of war, and seeing this makes Yoko furious and abandon her senses and foolishly fly at the soldiers. This is the first instance where we see Yoko's power and fierceness when it comes to her loved ones and actually, well, herself and her country's future, and this is the spark that develops throughout the book. Another scene that shows how Yoko can be determined even when doing something that is terrifying to her is how she dances for the wounded soldiers. So Yoko's mother makes her take dance classes and also learn classical poetry and basically just uphold her education even throughout the war. She is also chosen to go and perform at a hospital for wounded soldiers. On the stage, she is the youngest one and she's very nervous. She doesn't really want to perform, but the soldiers kind of make fun of her because she's the youngest, and this lightens the mood for her, and she goes ahead and just has fun and stops caring what people think. She dances and she really gives it her all, and after that, one of the doctors approaches her and he says, well, why don't you visit one of our patients? His name is Mr. Matsumoro, and he's all wrapped in bandages and he doesn't really want to eat or drink or do anything. And even though she's terrified because she thinks that he looks like a mummy, she goes ahead, she meets him, she's really pleasant to him, she's really nice to him, and actually this later saves their entire life. He later comes and tells them he got them a ticket onto a train to Seoul, but before that Hideo had gotten a job to work at a factory producing ammunitions, so he's actually not there. However, the ticket says they have to leave at 4 a.m, so they have to leave immediately. What ends up happening is that mother leaves Hideo a note and they all flee towards the train. The train is a medical one transporting sick patients, and they're just lucky that they get admitted. With them they have several canteens and a little bit of food, and actually Yoko is in a terrible mood all the time. She's tired, she doesn't really want to be here, she doesn't want to abandon Hideo, and it's thanks to her older sister Ko that she survives because Ko keeps just like yelling at her all the time. And it's once they get to the train and once they sit down that the situation really shows just how important keeping traditions and their own values to Yoko's family. So there's a pregnant woman who's thirsty, and so Yoko offers her some water, but Ko tells her to, well, offer her some water but not too much because she herself is going to be thirsty later. And the characters show their inner conflict because they want to stay true to their character and to their upbringing and to help out the vulnerable. However, they also recognize the fragility of their own situation and the necessity to ration supplies. They're on the run, and so they're going to need all that they have. Actually, Yoko's mother tells her to, even though Yoko is starving, to not eat right now because if she pulls out the food and she shows it to the sick patients, they're going to have to share it. And of course, we as the reader recognize that, well, they don't need to share it, right? Well, it's their food, it's their choice, it's kind of that approach, but it's their upbringing that has taught them that if you have food, you should share it if you have the opportunity to share it. Admitting here that they have food and that they can eat it but they don't have to share it would go against all of their character, and it would mean admitting admitting that this is the war and this is the situation right now. But there's also a little bit of hope, even amongst many deaths. The pregnant woman gives birth and her baby is alive. Yoko even gives them her blankets to keep them warm. Then a group of Korean communists get onto the train, and the nurse helps them and uses the blood from the pregnancy to disguise Yoko and her family. Because they were kind to the people in the train, the others decide to be kind too and to not betray their true identity. I was a bit surprised to see that the nurse knew that people were hunting for Yoko and her family, and also the whole Korean communist situation is very unclear because, well, people are saying that technically during the time it would have been extremely rare to see Korean communists. People are not even sure that Korean communists existed back then in huge numbers, so Yoko and her family must have been just really unlucky to have encountered them, or perhaps Yoko mistook them and this really wasn't Korean communists. This is another instance of potential historical inaccuracies. The reason that Korean Americans are petitioning for this book to stop being read and to stop it being studied in school is because it constantly places Koreans as the aggressor and it vilifies them as the people who are killing innocent people like Yoko. This doesn't really sit right knowing Japan's role in the war, and so this reversal of roles in a way seems almost to be like another instance of Japan denying responsibility, which is again why many people were angry. As a young girl, she was really scared, and well, she wasn't really thinking about her identity as a Japanese person, and so I can understand both sides here. This also raises the question about how innocent Yoko is. Personally, I think that her father's crime is not hers in any way, and I think the key message to take away from the book here, in a war there's not really any victors, there's simply death, and there's people dying all around, Koreans, Japanese, American soldiers, Russian soldiers, there's just people dying and innocents are suffering, and so we should avoid war at all costs and aim for peace. The train Yoko, her mother, and her sister are riding on breaks down, and so they're forced to walk the rest of the way to Seoul. They walk by night, but still, they're stopped by the Korean Communist Army and they're about to assault Yoko's sister when suddenly there's an explosion. By sheer luck, the soldiers all end up dead, whereas Yoko, her mother, and her sister seem to be okay because they threw themselves down on the ground and covered their heads as they had been taught to before. But the Korean soldiers do not know how to back down. They do not know how to stay low, and this also seems to be a little politically loaded since Japan, well, occupied Korea and Koreans protested, so this kind of seems to be saying like, oh, Koreans don't know when to stay low and when to lie down and when to like back away. I definitely recognize that this was probably not the intention. It's semi-autobiographical, and I mean, after all, I think this is a passage that makes you consider just how important the author's identity is in shaping the political kind of parts of the story, politically loaded comments set at targeting Koreans, or whether this is simply the tale of a girl who is scared and she makes these comments not realizing that her identity plays a role in how people perceive her words. We switch to Hideyo's story. His factory is attacked, but he and his friends luckily survive, so they go to a Korean friend's houses, but they discover that the Korean friends are dead too. They take their clothes, they put them on, they talk only in Korean, they walk through the night. They walk like this for 10 days. Suddenly they see a group of people also walking and trying to escape, and the people tell them that Japan has lost the war. After that, they're stopped by Russian soldiers and they pretend to be Korean communists, and the Russian soldiers tell them that there is work to be done in Tonchan. So they go to Tonchan, which is just about like a quarter of the way to Seoul, and the work there is to basically put dead bodies into sacks and throw them in the river. This is like a very grim juxtaposition because Yoko was going on the train, they threw out people who died. So the brother is essentially picking up the trail that Yoko has left behind, and he's literally on track since this is a train track, so this is like a happy situation, but it's also of course a traumatizing. Back to the mother, Yoko, and her sister. They arrive in Seoul finally, and they're taken in and inspected, and it turns out that Yoko has a deep wound under her right breast and a piece of metal in her ear. This happened after the explosion and the situation with the Korean communists, and Yoko has been complaining like all the way after that, but her mother and Ko weren't really acknowledging her pain, which is understandable because if they did, then maybe she wouldn't be able to make it. However, this is also a checkpoint in the story because it's kind of saying like, Yoko, your pain and your feelings and emotions are valid. They go to a warehouse, and there we have the scene of Korean men assaulting women and nobody stopping them. While there's not any evidence, I think we should acknowledge that well, how are you going to really get evidence that this happened? So while this does seem to be yet another narrative point in targeting Koreans, as many Korean Americans believe, I do also think that the situation doesn't necessarily make all of Yoko's words a lie, because if it did happen, it would be very hard to prove. They get to a ship headed towards Fukuoka, and they keep leaving messages to Hideo telling him where to find them. And Hideo never finds these messages. However, they also leave messages on a newspaper, and he does eventually find those. The author gives this message of resilience and to just continue and to hope, because if they gave up hope and they said, well, he's never going to find them, then he could have potentially never found them, and he did find them. I'll skip over some scenes that I don't think are as important in the overall analysis, but they eventually arrive in Japan safely and they head to Aomori. However, the mother decides that actually she's going to continue going on, and to see what happened to the grandparents, they should stay behind in Kyoto and continue their education. And so we have a sort of circular loop, and we come back to the beginning, and a sense of normalcy is restored because they're back in school. However, on their return to Kyoto, their mother dies, and the sisters begin to struggle again because now they have no money, the price goes up for the school, and they need to somehow pay for this. However, Yoko listens to her mother's last words, and they discover that the cloth that her mother carried actually has some money inside. So they use the money to pay for some expenses, and what the money doesn't cover, they use their sewing skills to make and sell. While all this is happening, Hideo is saved by a Korean family, and this is very important because this directly states that not every Korean person is a criminal, and that Yoko acknowledges this, and it's a different sort of impression from what happened in the first half of the book. One nation and one's atrocities doesn't necessarily mean that every single person of that country is evil. So also Yoko in her school, she is bullied and she is continuously targeted. However, she makes friends with a stuttering man called Mr. Naido, and he helps her and collects stationery, and she talks slowly to him, and the two become very good friends. There's an essay competition, and Yoko writes about her school hardships in an essay titled Understand. So why does she not write about the war? I think this is because for her, the situation in school right now is a sort of bigger betrayal. Because, I mean, she has gone through this war. She has literally seen people die around her, constantly. And here we have these girls who are fortunate enough to be dressed nicely, to be in school, to be alive, and yet they treat her like this. They treat her as if she is inferior. But her experiences, for her, they make her incredibly powerful. The fact that she has survived, the fact that she is here, she has understanding of the war. They don't. And I think this really shows her strengths of character, that she doesn't respond and she actually continues going to school. And this also shows her evolution as a character throughout the story. In the start of the story, she wasn't really a true survivor like Ko and her mother, who had enough understanding to know what to do about the war, to know how to survive. But now at the end, she fully recognizes what must be done, and she has faced all these hardships, and so she continues going to school, and she continues to be herself and to not care about what others think. The essay actually ultimately makes Mr. Matsumoro find her because he has seen her name in the newspaper, and so what he does is he places ads for Hideo. Hideo eventually returns to Japan a healthy man after leaving the kind Korean family, and he finds Yoko and Ko. Three of them happily reunite, and they lie down and they gaze at the stars, and they feel as if victory is finally there. And I think this is also a nice ending, that even though Japan has lost the war, and Yoko feels this sharply, well, because she was raised with the sense of patriotism and national importance, now she has found a sort of inner victory within herself. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. If anyone has any requests, please leave them below. I hope this video helped. I know it was long, but hopefully I covered everything in enough detail to be a solid study guide. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!